The first person who showed up at my door wasn't my closest friend. It wasn't my brother, who lived 40 minutes away in Mississauga and had been texting me, "Let me know if you need anything," for 3 weeks. It wasn't anyone I would have called in that moment, because I wasn't calling anyone. I was sitting on the floor of my kitchen in Hamilton, Ontario, with my back against the cabinet under the sink, because that was the only place that felt small enough, and I was staring at a letter from the bank that confirmed what my accountant had been trying to tell me for 2 months. The business was gone. 4 years of it. Gone. And the first person who knocked on my door that evening was Vera Lund, the woman from 4B who had, on 3 separate occasions, filed noise complaints about my standing mixer. I should back up. I opened Driftwood Bakery in the spring, 4 years before all of this happened. It was a small place on James Street North, the kind of neighborhood in Hamilton that was always on the edge of something. Half art galleries, half empty storefronts, always almost becoming what people hoped it would be. I'd saved for 6 years. I'd done the business plan, the loans through BDC, the whole thing. And for a while it worked. Not perfectly, not without 14-hour days and flour under my fingernails and a social life that quietly disappeared, but it worked. Vera was one of my first regular customers. She'd come in on Saturday mornings, order a plain croissant and an Americano, and find something to correct. The croissant was slightly underbaked. The music was too loud for a morning establishment. The tables were placed in a way that disrupted foot traffic. I smiled and nodded every time, because that's what you do, and because she kept coming back, which I eventually understood, meant she liked the place, even if she refused to say so directly. We lived in the same building, which I didn't know until she showed up at my door one evening, 6 months after the bakery opened, to inform me that my standing mixer, which I used to test recipes on weekends, was vibrating through the ceiling of her apartment. She was in 4B. I was in 5B, directly above her. I apologized. I moved the mixer. She said nothing more about it until the second noise complaint, and then the third, filed through building management like official documents, which I found both infuriating and sort of impressive. Who does that? Who has that kind of follow-through over a mixer? Vera Lund, apparently. After the third complaint, I knocked on her door, fully prepared to be reasonable and professional about the whole thing. And she opened it before I'd finished knocking, like she'd been waiting. She was holding a book, something thick, academic-looking, with her finger holding the page, and she looked at me the way you look at someone whose name you already know the shape of. "I'm not unreasonable," she said immediately. "I didn't say you were. You knocked like someone who's been rehearsing." I hadn't, but now I was off balance, which I suspected was the point. We talked in the doorway for 11 minutes. I know because I checked my phone afterward, because it felt both shorter and longer than that, and by the end of it we had reached an agreement. No mixer after 9 on weekends. She would, in exchange, stop filing formal complaints and come to me directly. She said she preferred direct anyway. I believed her. After that, we had a kind of hallway relationship. Brief exchanges. Occasional observations. She'd notice things. When I looked tired. When the bakery must have had a rough week because I was coming home later. When I was carrying more bags than usual from Fortino's and clearly stress cooking. She didn't comment on most of it. She just noticed, which I found more unsettling than comments would have been. The bakery started struggling in year 3. Not immediately, not dramatically. Just quietly, the way water gets into a foundation. You don't see it until you do, and then you can't unsee it. Supply costs went up. Foot traffic shifted when a bigger cafe opened 2 blocks over. I took on more debt to renovate, trying to compete, and the renovation took 3 weeks longer than planned, which meant 3 weeks of being closed during what should have been a good season. I didn't tell anyone how bad it was. Not sure why. Pride, probably. The particular kind of pride that makes you say, "It's fine, just a rough patch," until you're sitting on a kitchen floor reading a letter from your bank. That was a Tuesday in November. Cold in the way Hamilton gets cold. Not dramatic, just relentless. I'd been at the accountant's office that morning, and she'd walked me through the numbers carefully, the way people do when they're trying to be kind about something irreversible. I drove home. I made tea I didn't drink. I sat on the floor. Vera knocked at 6:47 p.m. I almost didn't answer. I didn't want to talk to anyone, and I especially didn't want to talk to Vera, because Vera noticed things, and I couldn't handle being noticed right then. But she knocked twice, paused, and knocked again. Different rhythm from the first two, like a question mark. And something about that made me get up. I opened the door. She was standing there in a dark green cardigan, holding a casserole dish covered in foil with both hands. She looked at my face for about half a second. "You look terrible," she said. "Thank you, Vera. I made too much shepherd's pie." She held out the dish. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just redistributing." I stared at the dish, then at her. "You made shepherd's pie. It's November. What else would I make?" That wasn't really a question. I took the dish. She turned to leave, and then paused, half turned back, and said, almost as an afterthought, "If you want company while you eat it, knock on 4B. I'm not doing anything important." She left before I could respond. I ate the shepherd's pie standing at my kitchen counter, still in my coat, reading the bank letter again, and it was the best thing I'd eaten in weeks, which I chose not to examine too closely. I knocked on 4B at 8:15. She let me in without any expression of surprise. Her apartment was the mirror of mine, same layout, different texture. Books everywhere organized in a way that suggested a system I didn't understand. A low lamp on in the living room. She was already making tea, apparently preemptively, and she handed me a mug when I sat down on her couch. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked. "Not really." "Okay." She sat across from me and picked up her book. We sat like that for almost an hour, me with my tea, her reading, no music, no television, just the occasional sound of a streetcar on the road below her window. And somehow that was exactly what I needed. Not silence, not conversation, just presence that didn't require anything from me. Eventually I said, "The bakery's done." She looked up from the book. "Officially," I said, "as of this morning." She set the book down. She didn't say "I'm sorry," didn't say "these things happen," didn't say "you'll bounce back." She said, "Tell me what happened." So I did, not all at once, in pieces, circling back, losing the thread and finding it again. 4 years of it. What went wrong when? What I probably should have done differently. What I definitely couldn't have predicted. She listened without interrupting, except to ask questions that were so specific they made me realize she'd already been paying attention to more than I'd said out loud. She'd noticed the later hours, the fewer bags from the market, the way I stopped talking about the bakery in the elevator the way I used to. By the time I stopped talking, it was past 11. "You should sleep," she said. "Probably." She stood up to walk me out, and at the door I turned and said, because it needed to be said, "Thank you. For the shepherd's pie, and for," I gestured vaguely at the room. "You would have knocked eventually," she said. I don't know why that helped, but it did. The weeks after were bad in a different way than I expected. I thought closing a business would feel like an ending, clean, definitive. Instead, it felt like a long administrative process with grief inside it. CRA filings, conversations with the landlord about the lease, selling equipment. My espresso machine went to a place in Dundas, the display cases to a woman in Burlington. Each one felt like a specific small funeral. Vera kept showing up. Not constantly, not intrusively, in the particular way she did things, which was with precision and without announcement. A container of soup left outside my door with a sticky note that said "Only Tuesday" on it, which I thought meant she'd made it on Tuesday, and only later realized meant she'd be making it every Tuesday. A library book on financial restructuring slipped under my door with certain pages. Dog-eared, no note. She stopped by once when I was trying to process some paperwork I didn't understand and sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours, helping me parse it, with the same focus she gave her academic books. And when we finished, she said, "You should have gone to a lawyer for this," and then left like it was settled. I told her I didn't have money for a lawyer right now. She said her cousin was a paralegal and would probably help for dinner. That was how we ended up having Vera's cousin Bridget over for a meal that I cooked. Because I could still cook, that hadn't changed, and Bridget went through my paperwork over lamb chops and roasted potatoes and charged me nothing. Vera sat at the end of the table and acted as if this was all perfectly ordinary, which it clearly was not. I started to understand slowly that this was how Vera worked. She didn't announce her care. She didn't make speeches about being there for you. She just quietly arranged things. Problems solved without calling it that. Showed up with food and claimed she'd made too much, which was technically possible, but also probably not always true. One morning, I said this to her directly, standing in the hallway between our doors. "You keep doing things," I said. "For me." She gave me the look she reserved for obvious statements. Yes, you don't have to. I'm aware, she said. I do it anyway. These are different things. Then she went inside. That was the whole conversation. I'd been applying for jobs in the weeks since, because I needed income, and because sitting still felt dangerous. My background was in food operations, which was both an asset and a liability. I knew the industry. But the industry in Hamilton in November wasn't exactly surging with opportunities, and being the guy who just closed his own place didn't make for the most confident application letter. I got a few interviews, nothing that felt right, and in the meantime, I picked up some contract catering work through a contact of mine, which paid enough to keep me above water. Vera did not comment on any of this directly. She asked questions instead, not the anxious kind, the curious kind, like she was genuinely interested in the problem rather than worried about the outcome. What was I looking for exactly? What parts of the bakery had I liked most? What would I do differently if I started again? And was starting again something I actually wanted, or just the shape my identity had taken and I hadn't examined it yet? That last question annoyed me. It also kept me up for several nights. I was getting better, incrementally. Some days better than others. Some mornings I woke up, and for a split second forgot what had happened, and then the thing landed on me again, and the morning had to be rebuilt from scratch. Vera seemed to understand those mornings, without my saying anything about them. She'd appeared once with coffee, at 7 a.m., knocked, handed it through the door like a transaction, and left. Not a word about how I looked or what she'd observed. Just coffee. It was in January that things shifted between us. Not dramatically. More like a slow pressure that had been building finally found a crack. We'd been at her kitchen table, which had become something of a regular location. Her, with her reading. Me working on applications or catering proposals, both of us quiet in that comfortable way I hadn't expected to find with her. It was late, close to midnight, and the radiator was making its particular sound, and she was marking something in the margins of her book when she looked up for no apparent reason and said, "Why do you make it hard for people to help you?" I looked up from my laptop. "What? Your brother called, didn't he? And your friend, the one who keeps texting. How do you know that? You checked your phone twice in the last hour and put it face down both times." I opened my mouth and then closed it, because there was no good answer that wasn't the true one. I don't want them to see me like this. Vera put her pen down. Like what? Like this. I gestured vaguely at the general situation, the laptop, the evening, the January of all of it. She looked at me for a moment with a particular directness that I had, over these months, stopped finding confrontational and started finding clarifying. You think that showing them you're struggling is a worse thing than making them watch you struggle from a distance. That landed somewhere specific. I know what that's like, she said, quieter now. Deciding that the people who care about you should be protected from the full version of you. I've done it, she paused. It doesn't protect them, it just makes you lonelier. I looked at the table. That's a very pointed thing to say at midnight. I'm not known for my timing. That got me unexpectedly. I laughed. A real one, short, surprised at itself. She didn't smile exactly, but something around her eyes did. Then she went back to her book. I texted my brother that night. Not a lot, just enough. He called in the morning and we talked for 40 minutes, which was longer than we'd talked in probably 2 years. He'd known something was wrong, he said. He hadn't wanted to push. I thought about what Vera had said, about making the people who loved you watch from a distance, thinking you were protecting them. I thought about how she'd learned that, whether it had cost her something specific to know it. A few weeks later, I asked her. We were walking along the waterfront. She'd suggested it, which I'd been surprised by because I'd assumed from her general stillness that she wasn't a person who walked for its own sake. The lake in February is not beautiful, exactly, but it has a kind of austere honesty to it that I was starting to appreciate. I asked, carefully, that thing you said a few weeks ago, about protecting people from yourself, where did you learn that? She was quiet for long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, my mother got sick when I was in my second year of my PhD, and I decided not to tell my supervisor or my colleagues because I wanted to keep those two things separate. I thought I could manage it alone. She paused. I nearly lost the PhD, and I nearly lost the last year I had with her because I divided myself so completely that I couldn't be present in either place. I didn't say anything right away. I'm sorry, I said eventually. It was a long time ago. She said it the way people do when something is both true and not quite the whole truth. I just know what that kind of division costs. We walked for a while without talking, and it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that meant something had been placed between us, and we were both holding it carefully. In March, I got offered a position, head baker for a new hospitality group opening a cafe restaurant, hybrid in the west end of the city. Good salary, good team from what I could tell in the interviews, and the kind of role where I'd have some creative input without carrying all the risk. I sat with the offer for 2 days before calling anyone about it. The first person I told was Vera. She was at her kitchen table when I knocked, which had become the natural order of things. I sat down across from her and put the offer letter on the table, and she read it without comment. Then she looked up. "What are you afraid of?" she asked. "That it's a step back." She tilted her head slightly. "From what?" I opened my mouth. "From having my own, from an identity that already ended," she said. Not cruelly, just clearly. I stared at the letter. "That's not the most encouraging way to put it. I'm not trying to encourage you. I'm trying to help you think. Those are different things," she didn't need to say. I'd learned to hear the structure of what she didn't say. "It's a good opportunity," she said. "You don't have to decide what it means before you take it. You can just take it and see what it becomes." I took the job. The first week was disorienting in the way that new things are. Too much information, too many names, the specific exhaustion of learning a space that isn't yours yet. I came home later than expected on the Thursday and almost walked past Vera's floor without stopping, and then didn't. She opened the door before I finished knocking. "How was it?" she asked. "Overwhelming." She stepped back from the door. "There's leftover dal." I came in and sat at her table for the fourth time that week, and she reheated the dal and we ate, and I told her about the day. What was hard, what was interesting, the head chef, who was meticulous about temperature in a way that actually made sense, the walk-in cooler layout that I'd already identified as a problem. She asked questions. I thought out loud. By the time I finished eating, I felt incrementally like myself again. This is what I hadn't expected about Vera. I'd expected efficiency. I'd expected the version of her that filed noise complaints and dog-eared library books and talked to me like I was a hypothesis she was testing. What I hadn't expected was this, the particular quality of her attention, which made everything feel more workable than it had seemed before. One evening in April, spring properly arriving, the light staying past 7, the kind of evening Hamilton does quietly and well, I was on my way home from a catering job, still in my chef's jacket, smelling like whatever I'd been cooking, tired in the comfortable way rather than the scared way. I passed the corner store on King Street that sold good flowers for not a lot of money, and I stopped and bought a bunch of tulips without completely knowing why. I knocked on 4B. She opened the door, took one look at me and the tulips, and said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," I said. "I did it anyway." I held out the flowers. "These are different things." She took them. And for the first time in all the months I'd known her, Vera Lund looked briefly, genuinely caught off guard. Then she stepped back from the door. "There's tea." I came in. I should tell you what happened after that, because that's the part that's harder to explain and also the part that matters most. What happened was not dramatic. There was no single moment, no grand declaration made in the rain. What there was, over the following weeks, was a slow recalibration. Like tuning something that's been slightly off for a long time and noticing when it finally holds the right note, how right it sounds. We had dinner together most evenings. Sometimes at mine, sometimes at hers. We argued about things, whether the new place on Lock Street was actually good or just well positioned. Whether I was being too precious about a recipe I was developing for the cafe. Whether she was being unreasonably stubborn about a specific citation dispute with a colleague whose work she found sloppy. She never softened her positions to make me comfortable, and I stopped trying to soften mine, and the arguments were some of the best conversations I had. I met her friend group, 2 other academics and a civil engineer named Tomas, who'd known Vera for 15 years, and who, when he met me, said only, "She mentions you a lot. She doesn't think she does, but she does." I didn't know what to do with that, but I held on to it. She came to the cafe one afternoon, sat at the counter, ordered a coffee and a piece of the cardamom loaf I'd been working on, and said nothing for 3 minutes. Then she said, "This is very good." Coming from Vera, that was approximately equivalent to a standing ovation. Sometime in June, late on a Sunday, we were sitting on my small balcony. Warm night, downtown Hamilton ambient noise below us, the specific kind of comfortable that doesn't need to be named. And I said, because it felt like the right time, and because I'd been thinking about it for a while, I want to tell you something. She looked over. I know that when all of this started, the bakery, the floor, the shepherd's pie, I wasn't easy to be around. I wasn't. I paused, finding the right word. I wasn't open to being helped, and you helped me anyway, in ways I didn't always recognize at the time, and I think you changed how I think about things. About asking for help, about what it means to have someone, really have someone. She was quiet. I kept going because it felt important to finish. I don't want to go back to the version of my life where you were just the person from 4B who filed noise complaints. I want this. I gestured between us, at the balcony, at the whole arrangement of the last 8 months. Whatever this is, I want to keep building it. Vera was quiet for a moment. Not the dismissive kind of quiet, the considering kind. Then she said, "You're asking me something. I'm trying to. Then ask it properly." I looked at her. "Vera, do you want to do this? Actually do this, not just fall into it with me." She held my gaze for a beat. Yes. No preamble, no qualifications, no performance around it, just yes. Simple, clear. Which was exactly how she did things, and which was I had come to understand one of the best things about her. I reached over and took her hand. She didn't pull it back. The summer was different in the good way. The same city, the same building, the same hallway between 4B and 5B, but with a shape I recognized and had not had in years. The cafe was doing well. I was sleeping through the night again. My brother came to visit, and we ate dinner at mine, all four of us. Vera's friend and Tomas, and my brother and his partner, and it was the kind of evening that makes you aware that you are right now inside a thing you'll want to remember. Later that night, after everyone had left, Vera was standing at my kitchen counter, washing the last of the dishes, and I was drying them, and she said out of nowhere, "You know you do still run the mixer too late on Saturdays." I looked at her. "I do not. You absolutely do. Are you going to file a formal complaint?" She handed me a bowl without looking up from the sink. "I'm doing something more effective. I'm starting an argument with the person responsible." I laughed, and it felt like the easiest thing in the world. It felt like everything that had happened in the last year, all the loss, and the paperwork, and the shepherd's pie, and the lakefront in February, and the tulips, and the late evenings at her kitchen table, all of it converging into something I could actually hold. I'd lost the bakery. That was real, and I still thought about it with a kind of grief that I expected would take years to fully settle. But somewhere in the wreckage of it, in the months I'd spent being quietly rebuilt by a woman who showed up with shepherd's pie and called it redistribution, I'd found something I hadn't known I was missing. The girl from 4B who filed noise complaints about my mixer is the reason I finally learned what it means to let someone stay. If you'd been in my situation, when she kept showing up, when it became clear she wasn't going anywhere, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, leave a like, subscribe to Whispered Someday, and I'll see you in the next one.